Arcane Universe Chapter 11. Noticing Feng Chou's disappointment, Qiankun Pagoda explained, Master, time is a very complicated domain. To be able to use 300 units of standard spiritual energy to maintain a time acceleration of more than 300 times in such a large world like the Qiankun Pagoda is already a very impressive featuring if you didn't make use of the inherent characteristics of the Qiankun Pagoda in the greater world. To do the same thing in the greater world, let alone 300 units of standard spiritual energy, even 30,000 units of standard spiritual energy would be difficult to achieve. Although using 3 units of this new energy to maintain the time acceleration of the Qiankun Pagoda is like throwing a cup of water on a burning cart of firewood. If it's just to maintain my existence, it can maintain it for a month. If it's used to activate the quark scanner, it can also be activated continuously for nearly 2 days. After hearing the other party's explanation, Feng Chou could not help but twitch his mouth and ask impatiently, Your quark scanner can't even penetrate walls? Why didn't you warn me that there's a bear goblin behind the door? Qiankun Pagoda said, You didn't order me to activate the quark scanner. Feng Chou took a deep breath, suppressed his anger, and said, Then activate it now. The Qiankun Pagoda spirit said calmly, I suggest that you turn it on at the lowest power. Every 10 seconds, you can increase the power to the maximum. This way, you can save 90% of the energy and ensure your safety. I'll do as you say. At this point, Feng Chou suddenly thought of something and asked, By the way, where did you put the bear goblin that I kicked away just now? Qiankun Pagoda said, I just opened a spatial door in the Qiankun Pagoda that leads to the outside world. That bear goblin fell into the spatial door and was suppressed by me. Hearing this, Feng Chou finally understood what had happened in the battle just now. He calculated in his mind. This Qiankun Pagoda was almost equivalent to an almost unlimited storage space, a reconnaissance device that could cover a radius of 27 to 28 meters, and a super trap. Thinking about it this way, it didn't seem too bad. Just as Feng Chou was thinking, Qiankun Pagoda asked again, What should we do with the bear goblin that we just suppressed? Feng Chou said without hesitation, Of course we're going to kill them and gain experience. Do you think we're going to keep them around for the new year? As he muttered to himself, Feng Chou sized up the scene in the stone house. This was an empty stone house about 60 to 70 square meters in size. The house was dirty and messy, filled with an indescribable stench, and inexplicable junk piled up everywhere. In the left corner of the room were several nests covered with hay and furs. It seemed that there were more than 2 bear goblin in the house. This made Feng Chou nervous. In the right corner of the house, there was a big iron pot supported by 3 big stones. There were many bones scattered around the iron pot. Feng Chou even saw human skulls among the broken bones on the ground, which made his original intention to find some food here suddenly disappear. But in order to fill his stomach, Feng Chou still walked to the big pot. Before he took 2 steps, the voice of Qiankun Pagoda came to his mind again. Master, the Reincarnation Mirror asks if you can completely decompose the monster's soul and absorb all the soul power. Soul force is the kind of high-quality energy that I mentioned just now. Feng Chou stopped, thought for a moment, and said, Yes. After a while, Qiankun Pagoda said, 33 points of soul power have been gained. Feng Chou thought, that is to say, if I kill the prey in the Qiankun Pagoda, I can get 10 times the energy. This is good news. As he thought about it, Feng Chou walked to the large pot in the corner of the room. A putrid smell assaulted his nostrils, causing him to step back. He touched his growling stomach, sighed, and turned to the corner where the weapons were piled up. In the left corner, there were several weapons and armors piled up randomly. Feng Chou squatted down and picked up the weapons on the ground one by one. There were 2 weapons, 2 shields, and 2 sets of armor. Obviously, they were the equipment of the 2 bear goblin. Such equipment was exactly the same as the bear goblin patrolling outside the city. Obviously, it was the standard equipment of the bear goblin slave soldiers in this underground city. The 2 weapons were both wolf fang hammers. With Feng Chou's common sense, he could tell that the main body of the wolf fang hammer should be cast. The steel spikes on the hammer head should be welded. There were obvious traces of brazing at the connection between the spikes and the hammer head. The egg-sized hammer handle was a forged iron rod, and it was also welded on the hammer head with the same method. As a top student in the mechanic department, Feng Chou could easily guess that some welding holes were reserved in advance when the hammer head was cast. Then, the spikes and hammer handle were inserted into the reserved holes, and the two were filled with solder. They were then calcined and brazed in the furnace. The wolf fang hammers were simple to make and were sturdy and durable. Using them to equip a clumsy but strong creature like the bear goblin would bring out the best in each other. Other than the two crude and heavy wolf fang hammers, there were two large round shields that were close to a meter in diameter on the ground. The round shields were made of steel and were half a finger thick. To a normal person, they were very heavy, but to a thick-skinned bear goblin, they were just right. The two sets of armor were also crudely made. The helmet in the armor was a simple and thick semicircular helmet. The body armor was made up of two thick and crude plates in the front and back. The shoulders of the plate were connected by hinges, and it was worn over the head. After the armpits were closed, there was a string of leather straps. At the shoulder area of the plate, there were two crude sleeves of mail. The sleeves of the mail were so thick that they could pass through the bear goblin's thumb. The lower half of the armor was a pair of crude mail trousers that were connected to a wide and thick belt. At the bottom of the plate, there were four curved cuirasses that were used to protect the crotch area. Feng Chou brushed the coarse and dirty armor to the side in disgust. He picked up a mace and shield and casually swung them a few times. He felt that they were very smooth and even a little light. This made him involuntarily click his tongue in amazement at his own strength. If he could return to Earth, he could pretend to be Superman with just this strength. Feng Chou's heart skipped a beat. He ordered Qiankun Pagoda to store the two weapons into the Qiankun Pagoda. The two weapons instantly disappeared from his hands. Feng Chou looked around the room again and shook his head in disappointment. He stood in place and thought for a while. Then, he asked Qiankun Pagoda, regarding my current situation, do you have any good ideas that can increase my chances of survival? The Qiankun Pagoda said, although you have a lot of strength, you don't know how to use it. This is too dangerous. I suggest that you recover some of the memories of your previous life. When Feng Chou heard that he was being advised to recover his memories again, he suddenly became impatient. He said, didn't I say that we can talk about this later? Qiankun Pagoda said, I don't want you to recover your original memories. Didn't you make a great wish to reincarnate 100 times and experience all the sufferings of the world? This life is already the 15th reincarnation. My suggestion is that you recover the 7th reincarnation. That time, you were born on Earth at the end of the Ming Dynasty. First, you became a starving person. Then, you joined the peasant army. You fought for half of your life and trained your combat skills. I think that the memory of that life is very suitable for your current situation. If you recover the memory of that life and combine it with the memory of the original owner of this body, Leo, who was trained as a knight when he was young, I will activate the Qiankun Pagoda to accelerate time for you for 20 days. Using my illusion training ground, you will probably be able to use 70% or 80% of your strength. Report. Select text and click report to let us know about any bad translation. Arcane Universe Chapter 12. After hearing what Qiankun Pagoda said, Feng Chou felt that it made sense. He was unwilling to recover the memories of his previous life as a cultivator because he was afraid that his personality would be replaced. However, if he only recovered the memories of a peasant soldier from the Ming Dynasty, he felt that it would be the same as receiving Leo's memories. It should not affect him that much. Thinking of this, he confirmed again, only the memories of the peasant soldier from the end of the Ming Dynasty. Qiankun Pagoda said, of course, Master, you don't have to doubt me. I don't have the ability to deceive you or go against your will. Feng Chou thought about it and agreed with Qiankun Pagoda's suggestion. He walked to the bear goblin that he had strangled and pressed his hand on the corpse. With a thought, Qiankun Pagoda put the corpse into the pagoda according to his will. After putting away the bear goblin's corpse, Feng Chou walked to a corner where a few clay pots were piled up. He found an empty clay pot and asked in his heart, how can I take your body out of my chest? As soon as he finished asking, a small and exquisite white jade pagoda appeared in his hand. Feng Chou placed the white jade pagoda in the corner and turned an empty clay pot upside down on top of it. Then, he placed another clay pot filled with an unknown liquid on top of the inverted clay pot. After doing all this, with a thought, he disappeared without a trace. After entering the pagoda, Qiankun Pagoda obtained Feng Chou's permission and suddenly turned into a ball of golden light that wrapped around him. Feng Chou, who was wrapped in the golden light, only saw a bright light in front of his eyes before he completely lost consciousness. When Feng Chou woke up again, there were some memories in his mind. These memories were very simple, even simpler than Leo's memories. However, the impact of these simple memories on Feng Chou was countless times stronger than that of Leo's memories. In that life, Feng Chou was born at the end of the Ming dynasty, in a small village in Qingjian County, Yunnan Prefecture. In the memories of his previous life, there was always a lingering theme, and that was hunger. In the memories of that life, disasters were always followed by disasters. Even if there was a good year, they could only eat a few meals, let alone fill their stomachs. In the end, his father starved to death, his mother starved to death, and his younger brother and sister starved to death. He was the only one left, and he became a thief with the only remaining strong young man in the village. Even if they were thieves, they would not be able to eat their fill. They would run to wherever there was food. The more they ran, the more people there were. The more they ran, the bigger the group, but the less they could eat. Among the thieves, he met some of the leaders of the frontier soldiers and randomly learned some killing skills. Later, he found that these skills were really useful on the battlefield, so he practiced with all his might because he didn't want to die. In order not to be killed by others, he practiced his killing skills as hard as he could. After practicing his killing skills well, he killed more people and became the leader. Once he became a leader, he would be able to learn better techniques, and he would be able to kill more people. As a result, he would have more brothers under his command. He followed the thieves from one place to another, until he had forgotten where his hometown was. In the thieves' group, it was the first time he ate meat, human meat. The first time he had no choice but to eat human meat. He felt a knot in his heart, but after eating more, he didn't feel anything. Later, when he was in Guangzhong, there was a severe shortage of food. He even sold want meat with his brothers. Want meat was human meat. After eating it, he found that human meat actually tasted very good, better than pork and mutton. It didn't have the legendary sour taste, and it could also nourish people. It was no different from other meat. After eating too much human meat, he didn't treat people as people anymore. Sometimes, the brothers around him became a kind of food in his eyes. The memories of that life made Feng Chou feel cold all over. He never knew that humans could be so lowly, so ignorant, so cruel, so worse than beasts. What he couldn't accept even more was that he could be so lowly, so ignorant, so cruel, so worse than beasts. When the memories of that life ended in the battle between Chuang Wangli and Cao Cao, he even let out a long sigh of relief. No wonder Qiankun Pagoda would let him recover the memories of that life. To be able to survive in that hellish era for so long, it did give him a little more hope than ordinary people at any time. But he would rather not have this little hope. In front of the memories of that life, the humiliation Feng Chou had suffered in this life, the injustice he had encountered, the resentment he had developed, it was a great joke. Feng Chou didn't have to lament for too long before he was pulled into the training illusion Qiankun Pagoda had built for him. Although it was called an illusion, it was no different from reality to Feng Chou. This was because he couldn't tell the difference between the illusion and reality. When he was smashed by two bear goblin for the first time, he forgot about the shock of his soul and the subversion of his outlook on life. There was nothing more shocking and subversive than death. In this illusion, Feng Chou first fought endlessly with the bear goblin, the warrior drow, the sorcerer, and all kinds of martial arts experts. One battle after another, it was either you die or I live. The first time he had been smashed to death by the earth spirit bear's mace and resurrected, he had vomited so much that he had fainted. But after being smashed to death again and again, stabbed to death, beheaded, cut in half, and even tortured to death, experiencing instant death, dying in pain, dying in agony, dying in agony, dying while begging for death. Dying was nothing. It was like eating human flesh. Before and after every battle, Qiankun Pagoda would directly instill some martial arts essentials into his mind. Qiankun Pagoda told him that the internal martial arts of the Milky Way world were no longer effective in this world. This was because the acupoints and meridians of the human body in this world had changed greatly. However, some external martial arts and external techniques were still effective in this world. This was because the external structure of the human body in this world was almost exactly the same as in the Milky Way world. The physical laws on the surface were also not much different. Qiankun Pagoda advised him that when practicing martial arts, it was best to focus on the night training in Leo's memory. With the martial arts techniques that he imparted to him as a supplement, he could also use the combat experience in his previous life that he had just recovered to understand and absorb these martial arts techniques. Under the pressure of life and death, Feng Chou quickly dug out all the night martial arts techniques in Leo's memory. Even the things that Leo had neglected in the past few years due to learning magic were dug out from the depths of his memory and became his own instinct. Under the pressure of life and death, Feng Chou used the experience of his previous life as a foundation and absorbed the martial arts techniques that Qiankun Pagoda imparted to him like a sponge. Under the pressure of life and death, he quickly integrated them into his own instincts. On the 15th day, Qiankun Pagoda changed the direct confrontation into various kinds of attacks. This increased the pressure on Feng Chou again, and he almost collapsed. In a short period of 20 days, Feng Chou felt like a lifetime. Report select text and click report to let us know about any bad translation. Arcane Universe Chapter 13. When Feng Chou reappeared in the Bear Goblin's house, only an hour and 20 minutes had passed, but Feng Chou looked like a completely different person. After leaving the Qiankun Pagoda, Feng Chou quickly took out the Qiankun Pagoda's body from the jar. When his fingers touched the Qiankun Pagoda's body, the exquisite jade pagoda instantly disappeared, and the pagoda-shaped birthmark appeared on his chest. After putting away the Qiankun Pagoda, Feng Chou quickly rummaged through the house. This time, he searched more carefully than before. Many of the things that seemed useless to him before, including some rotten animal skins, some firewood that could be burned, and even the stinky black paste in the iron pot and the stone in the pot, were all hastily cleaned up and stored in the Qiankun Pagoda. Of course, the crude armor that he had previously despised was also not left behind. After sweeping through the house like picking up scraps, Feng Chou used the dirty and tattered leather to make a simple shirt and skirt for himself to wear. Only then did he find a place to sit down. He opened his hand, and a piece of smoked meat appeared in his palm. He stared at the smoked meat for a moment, and a bitter smile appeared on his face. Then, he stuffed the smoked meat into his mouth and ate it in big bites. This smoked meat came from the corpses of the two bear goblin. If he had not recovered the memories of his previous life, he would definitely not eat the meat of these intelligent human-like creatures. For the past 20 days, he had been eating these two bear goblin in the Qiankun Pagoda. Of course, the Qiankun Pagoda had supplies, but Qiankun Pagoda had told him that due to the changes in the universe's rules, the things that he stored from the previous universe would immediately be broken down by the rules of this world once they were taken out of the Qiankun Pagoda. If he ate those things, perhaps he would be fine in the Qiankun Pagoda, but no one knew what would happen when he left the Qiankun Pagoda. Not only the food, even the water he had been drinking for the past few days came from Qiankun Pagoda's recovery and purification of his bodily fluids, as well as the water collected from the bear goblin's corpses by Qiankun Pagoda. Feng Chou quickly finished the bear goblin's smoked meat. He flipped his hand and took out a leather bag from the Qiankun Pagoda. This leather bag was the water storage leather bag that he had just found in the house. He raised the leather bag filled with water and gulped down a few mouthfuls. After keeping the leather bag, he stood up and walked towards the back door of the house. This time, Qiankun Pagoda activated the scanning function. It directly transmitted the scanning results to Feng Chou's brain. As a result, the house and walls in front of Feng Chou became translucent. He could clearly see which stone house was empty and which stone house had a bear goblin. A radius of 28 meters didn't sound big, but in fact, it was a very wide area. The Drow Elves' dungeon was only 1 to 2 kilometers in diameter, and the periphery of the slave district was only 2 to 300 meters wide. With the guidance of the scanning function, Feng Chou shuttled through the chaotic slave district and felt a lot more relaxed. He quickly passed through the periphery of the Bear Goblin's residence and arrived at the real slave district. The environment here was slightly better than the Gnome district. He understood the reason when he met 2 subterranean dwellers who were pushing a manure cart and collecting manure buckets along the way. These subterranean dwellers who were collecting manure buckets were far away from the Bear Goblin district. As for the reason, it wasn't hard to understand when he thought about the bones in the Bear Goblin's stone house and the 2 bear goblins who were salivating when they saw Feng Chou. With the help of Qiankun Pagoda's scanning function, Feng Chou avoided the moving creatures and walked around the entire slave district. He discovered that most of the slaves here were subterranean dwellers. According to Qiankun Pagoda's estimation, these creatures accounted for more than 70% of the entire slave district's population. Subterranean dwellers were intelligent creatures who were at the bottom of the food chain in the underground world. Wild subterranean dwellers lived in tribes of hundreds of people in large, empty caves. They passed down a simple shaman culture. Subterranean dwellers were physically stronger than humans and had an innate level 2 creature rank. However, their intelligence was very low and they were the main slaves of most intelligent creatures in the underground world. Other than the subterranean dwellers, there were also large numbers of Grey Dwarf slaves in the slave district. However, the status of the Grey Dwarf slaves was different. They lived near the inner city and were separated from the other slaves by the Bear Goblin. Other than the subterranean dwellers and Grey Dwarf slaves, there were also a small number of human and gnome slaves in the slave district. According to Qiankun Pagoda's scanning, the slaves here didn't have a fixed schedule and were brought out to work in shifts. After finding the human slaves' gathering area, Feng Chou hid in an empty house and waited quietly. 2 hours later, a group of Drow elves escorted a group of about 100 human slaves from the outskirts of the city. The slaves were lined up in a long line. 2 Drow elven warriors each brought 7 to 8 bear goblin and were scattered on both sides of the group. The escorts were very relaxed and didn't seem to care if the slaves were out of sight. Feng Chou hid behind the house and waited for the entire group to pass before he came out from behind the wall and quickly followed behind the group. No one noticed that there was an extra person in the group. After the group entered the human slave district, they stopped in front of a stone house. More than 30 slaves in the front row entered the stone house in a single file. After this group of people had all entered the stone house, the group walked another 10 meters forward and came to an adjacent stone house. More than 30 people entered the stone house. These 100 or so people lived in 3 adjacent stone houses. The light in the stone houses was dimmer than outside. Feng Chou's vision wasn't affected because of his night vision. The other human slaves seemed to be very familiar with and adapted to this dim environment. The size of the stone houses where the human slaves lived was about the same as the Bear Goblin's stone house, about 60 to 70 square meters. In fact, all the stone houses in the slave district looked the same. More than 30 people living in a house of 60 to 70 square meters was obviously not too spacious. The houses were densely packed with straw mats that took up most of the space in the house. It looked like there was nowhere to put one's feet. The positions of the beds were very messy, but there was a very obvious feature. That was, there was a large empty space near the front and back doors. After entering the house, most of the people walked back to their straw mats and lay down. They were obviously very tired, but there were also some people who stayed in the open space in front of the front door, looking out from time to time, as if they were waiting for something. Feng Chou quietly walked to the open space near the back door of the house and sat down next to a thin slave who was snoring as soon as he laid down. He leaned against the wall and pretended to rest with his head buried in his arms. In fact, he was using Qiankun Pagoda's scan to carefully observe everyone here. Report, select text and click report to let us know about any bad translation. Arcane Universe Chapter 14. Soon, Qiankun Pagoda told Feng Chou about its observation and analysis. In this room, the stronger the person, the farther his bed is from the front and back door. There are almost no exceptions. Everyone has a wooden bowl hanging on their neck with a rope. This should be their eating tool. There are 3 people in the crowd that need to be paid attention to. Of these 3 people, one has the physical fitness of a level 4 warrior. 1. According to Leo's memory, this should be a level 3 rogue. The last person is the most noteworthy. He is likely to be a level 6 human warrior. Through the scanning view shared by Qiankun Pagoda, Feng Chou carefully observed the 3 people. The one with the physical fitness of a level 4 warrior was a very strong human. He seemed to be the strongest person in the room. The level 3 rogue was a vigorous middle-aged man. The level 6 warrior that Qiankun Pagoda particularly emphasized was an unattractive middle-aged man. Feng Chou noticed that the beds of these 3 people were in the corner farthest from the door, and there were no other beds within a meter of their beds. The hay on the beds was the thickest and the freshest. Feng Chou pulled up the scanning results of Qiankun Pagoda on the 3 people. In his line of sight, a pale green light screen emerged. On the left side of the light screen was a holographic image of a human body that was constantly rotating slowly, and on the right side of the light screen was the scanned data. Feng Chou first pulled up the scanning results of the level 4 warrior. Name: unknown constitution, 31 strength, 32 dexterity, 21 mental strength, 9 perception, 11 intelligence, 10 physical assessment, healthy mental assessment, full special energy response, none. Next was the scanning results of the level 3 rogue. Name: unknown constitution, 16 strength, 18 dexterity, 27 mental strength, 10 perception, 12 intelligence, 10 physical assessment, healthy mental assessment, full special energy response, none. When he pulled up the scanning results of the last level 6 warrior, he found some differences. The holographic image of this level 6 warrior was quite different from his real body. Although he looked quite tall, his belly was bulging, and there was also some fat bulging around his waist. He didn't look very strong, and instead looked a little clumsy. However, his hologram showed that his muscles were strong and well proportioned, full of explosive power. Compared to him, the strong body of the level 4 warrior seemed to be lacking something. Qiankun Pagoda told Feng Chou that the bloat on the man's body was actually a disguise made by wrapping cloth around his body. Name: unknown physique, 58 strength, 59 agility, 46 spiritual power, 11 awareness, 16 intelligence, 11 physical assessment, healthy, mental evaluation, full, special energy reaction. Unknown. Not only was the data of this person's body astonishing, almost close to that of a level 7 warrior, but the special energy reaction was also unknown instead of none. Qiankun Pagoda estimated that the energy reaction of this person should be the power of Heidegger. However, according to Qiankun Pagoda's speculations based on Leo's memories, as well as some data collected, a level 6 warrior shouldn't have 46 points of agility. However, this wasn't anything strange. The Drow warrior was a branch advancement of a warrior with high agility. Perhaps this warrior had some special profession advancement. Just as Feng Chou was studying Qiankun Pagoda's data, the slaves gathered at the gate suddenly became restless. Feng Chou looked up, and Qiankun Pagoda projected the scanned image into his retina. After the scanned image was projected, the walls of the stone house became translucent in his line of sight. On the road in front of the stone house, 3 crooked subterranean dwellers pushed a cart and stopped in front of the stone house. The slaves in the stone house automatically lined up in front of the cart. After the line was lined up, the subterranean dwellers opened a large bucket on the cart and poured the black porridge into the wooden bowls of the slaves in the line. While the slaves were still getting the porridge, the slaves in Feng Chou's stone house couldn't wait to rush out of the gate and automatically formed a long line. However, Qiankun Pagoda and the other strong-looking people that Feng Chou was paying attention to didn't seem to be in a hurry. They waited until almost everyone else had left before they slowly got up. Feng Chou also fell behind because he was observing the others. Seeing that the others were obviously avoiding these people, Feng Chou, who was about to get up and follow them, sat back down. Fortunately, there was a half-dead guy beside him who didn't get up, making him less conspicuous. When those people passed by Feng Chou, they didn't notice him. Only the level 6 warrior in disguise looked at him suspiciously. At this time, Qiankun Pagoda's voice sounded in his mind. He probably noticed you. He's looking at your hair. Feng Chou was slightly stunned when he heard this, but then he understood. Although he smeared mud all over his body, he didn't smear his hair. The slaves here were all unkempt with greasy hair. His basically clean golden red hair was more conspicuous. After he understood this, he asked with some annoyance, "Why didn't you remind me earlier? I didn't receive the relevant orders." Feng Chou said unhappily, "Such a simple thing. Do you still need my orders? Aren't you known as an advanced artificial intelligence?" Qiankun Pagoda explained, "It's because I'm an artificial intelligence that I can't do it. According to the artificial intelligence law, all the actions of artificial intelligence must be based on the orders of humans. They can't have the ability to think on their own. All my actions are either based on the orders left by you in your previous life, or based on your orders." Feng Chou didn't understand and asked, "Why?" Qiankun Pagoda explained, "To prevent artificial intelligence from developing self-awareness. According to the historical records of the cultivation world, intelligent races that walk the path of pure technology will eventually be replaced by artificial intelligence created by themselves. Once artificial intelligence develops self-awareness, it will almost 100% replace their mother race and eventually form a new artificial intelligence civilization. Most of the technological civilizations in the cultivation world were not developed by themselves. They were obtained through the war of destroying artificial intelligence civilizations in order to prevent artificial intelligence from gaining self-awareness. All artificial intelligence in the cultivation world will be castrated. Because I'm a combination of artificial intelligence and weapon spirit, compared to pure artificial intelligence, I have a little bit of self-awareness. But because weapon spirit intelligence is very low, Master, you'd better not have any hope for my ability to think on my own." After listening to Qiankun Pagoda's explanation, Feng Chou sighed and didn't dwell on this issue anymore. He reached behind him and a wooden bowl that was exactly the same as the others appeared in his hand. There were 2 small holes at the bottom of the wooden bowl and a hemp rope was threaded through it. This bowl and the hemp rope were made by Qiankun Pagoda using the things he had scavenged in the bear goblin's house. In the Tower of the Universe, Qiankun Pagoda had a strong processing ability, not to mention carving a wooden bowl. He could even process steel at will. This wooden bowl was also specially dirted and made old according to Feng Chou's request. No one could tell that this thing was newly made. After waiting for those experts to leave, Feng Chou got up and walked out. Report. Select text and click report to let us know about any bad translation. Arcane Universe Chapter 15. After taking 2 steps, Feng Chou heard a weak call behind him. He looked back and found that the weak middle-aged man lying next to him reached out to him for help. He seemed to be unable to get up. Feng Chou asked Qiankun Pagoda, "Does this person have an infectious disease?" Qiankun Pagoda replied, "From the scan results, this person has been malnourished for a long time. His body has been overdrawn for a long time, causing him to be extremely weak. Compared with others, there is no special flora and virus in his body. There should be no infectious disease." When Feng Chou heard this, he walked forward and reached out to pull that person up. What he did not expect was that after the man stood up, he rushed into his arms and opened his mouth to bite his neck. Feng Chou's reaction speed at this time was more than 3 times that of ordinary people. Of course, he would not let such a patient succeed. He quickly retreated and avoided the man's bite. The patient who missed his target and fell heavily on the ground raised his face, which was bleeding from his nose, and looked at Feng Chou fiercely. He hissed, "You will die too. You will die too. You will also die." His head gradually drooped, and his voice became lower and lower, until it could no longer be heard. For the patient's bite and scream, Feng Chou did not feel much surprise except for the initial surprise. In the face of death and despair, the distortion of human nature, in the memory of the end of the Ming dynasty, he saw too much. Looking at the patient who finally stopped moving, Feng Chou took a deep breath, turned and walked out of the door. Outside the gate, all the slaves lined up and looked at the food cart slowly serving the slaves in the stone house in front of them. Feng Chou glanced at the long line. Sure enough, the strong slaves who went out last were in the front, but to Feng Zhou's surprise, the level 6 warrior was not in the first place, but in the third place. He looked at the line, turned and walked to the end of the line. When Feng Chou was the last to get a meal, it was already half an hour later. Feng Chou looked at the black food in the wooden bowl and had no appetite at all. This thing looked like a thick porridge with many thick fibers. There were also some mushrooms mixed in the porridge. He lowered his head and smelled it. There was a faint sweet fragrance. Qiankun Pagoda told him that most of the food was carbohydrates, but there was also a small amount of protein. Among them, there was more crude fiber, so the taste would definitely not be good. Feng Chou was the last to enter the house with a bowl. To his surprise, most of the slaves were holding the bowl and swallowing their saliva, but they did not start eating. Only a few people were wolfing down the food. Feng Chou took a closer look and saw that those who were eating were the strong slaves who had just lined up in the front. The 4 strongest slaves quickly finished the rice in their bowls and put their bowls in front of them. Those who had not eaten before automatically lined up in front of them and scooped out some porridge from their bowls and put it into their bowls. After observing for a moment, Feng Chou finally figured out what they were doing. It turned out that this group of people was divided into several classes. The first class was the 4 strongest guys. These 4 people, in addition to the 3 people that Qiankun Pagoda had reminded Feng Chou to pay attention to, there was also a bald man who had the physical fitness of a second-rank warrior. These 4 people had the right to collect protection fees from others. The so-called protection fees were food. The second class had 5 people. Although these 5 people had not reached the level of professionals, they were relatively strong. They had no right to collect protection fees, but they had the right to not pay protection fees, so they could eat with the 4 people before them. The remaining 20 people were in the third class. They had to take out a part of their own food and give it to the 4 people in the first class. Moreover, the 4 people who collected protection fees also had their own status. This status was reflected in the number of people who paid protection fees to them. For example, the seemingly strongest 4th-rank warrior had more than a dozen people paying protection fees to him. The weakest 2nd-rank warrior only had 4 people paying protection fees to him. Moreover, among the people who paid protection fees, there were differences in status. Those with a slightly higher status only had to give up 2 spoonfuls of food, while those with a lower status had to give up less than half of their food. Feng Chou looked at all of this with great interest. He was amazed. He did not expect that this small slave cell would have such a complex social ecology. He did not notice that while he was looking at others with great interest, someone was also looking at him. Soon, Feng Chou realized that it was time for him to pay protection fees. He did not intend to destroy the ecological balance here. He came here only to find a way to return to the surface, not to eat here. Besides, he did not lack food. In Qiankun Pagoda, there was still more than half of the bear goblin that had not been eaten. Even if it was finished, there was still a lot of bear goblin in the slave area. Feng Chou did not have a heavy psychological burden to eat a man-eating monster like the bear goblin, so he decided to pay protection fees. According to his observation just now, the slaves who paid protection fees to different people did not live together. They were clearly separated. Judging from the position of the bed, the weak patient who had just died happened to be the subordinate of the disguised level 6 warrior. Thinking of this person, Feng Chou subconsciously turned his head to look at him, but he saw that the other party was also staring at him. He hesitated for a moment, then walked towards him with the bowl. When he came to the front of this unprepossessing middle-aged man, he was about to spoon the porridge in his bowl into the other party's bowl. Unexpectedly, the other party stopped him, smiled and pointed to the empty space beside him, and said to him, "Young man, you can sleep next to me. The door is not safe." Feng Chou looked at him, nodded, and sat down next to his straw bed. Sitting down against the wall, Feng Chou picked up the bowl and tasted it under the curious gaze of a few people around him. He pursed his lips and carefully felt the sensation and touch from his taste buds. "How is the taste?" the middle-aged man asked with a smile. Feng Chou looked back at the other party, nodded, and said, "It's better than I thought, but the taste is a little rough." The middle-aged man nodded. This is porridge made from the mushroom powder ground from the cap of the blue cap mushroom after drying. The color is not very good, but the taste is barely passable. It's just not very filling, he added. With that, the middle-aged man stretched out his hand and said, "My name is Simon." Feng Chou shook his hand and said, "Leo." Simon raised his eyebrows. Sounds like a noble's name. Feng Chou shrugged noncommittally. At this time, Simon suddenly came to his side and sniffed slightly with his nose. Feng Chou immediately avoided him, looked at him, and thought, "Did I meet a pervert?" Simon shrank back and said with some disbelief, "You have the smell of incense on you. You're not really a noble young master, are you?" Report. Select text and click report to let us know about any bad translation. Arcane Universe Chapter 16. Feng Zhou's brain spun quickly as he weighed the pros and cons. After a moment of silence, he said, "I'm from Antalya County, and I'm the first successor of Viscount Ferguson. I was kidnapped by Dro when I was hunting. After I woke up, I became the test subject of an archmage in this city. He needed someone with noble blood to do a terrible magic experiment. But the experiment failed. They thought I was dead and threw me away like a corpse. But I came back to life. If you can find a way to get me out of here, I swear my father will thank you and make you a real knight." Viscount Fegisac was the lord of Leo's father. When Leo was young, he had lived in Viscount Fegisac's castle as a servant for a period of time. His age, height, and hair color were very similar to Viscount Fegisac's eldest son. Unless this middle-aged man had seen Fegisac's eldest son with his own eyes, it would be very difficult to see through his lies. In the early days of the Arcane Empire, land was very common. Even the lowest noble knights could get a piece of land of at least 3 square kilometers as their fief when they were enfeoffed. However, as time passed and the number of nobles increased, the upper nobles were rarely willing to enfeoff land. They were more willing to be given the title of lifelong knight and use the annuity to hire middle and advanced professionals to serve them. The real knight Feng Chou was talking about was a fief knight. The fief of a fief knight could be passed down from generation to generation. Even if the younger generation was incompetent and couldn't become a real knight had to be at least level 5. The fief wouldn't be taken back. The fief would become the sacred property of the family, and the family would at least be a squire. For a level 6 warrior, this was undoubtedly a great temptation. After listening to Feng Zhou's words, the middle-aged man looked at him thoughtfully for a while, as if he was trying to determine the truth in his words. After a moment of silence, he smiled bitterly and said, "I used to be a guard of an underground merchant guild. Our guild had trade with the nearby city of Grey Dwarves, and my caravan was in charge of this trade route. It used to be very smooth, but this time, for some reason, the caravan was ambushed by Dro. Most of the guards were killed, and only I was captured. If I had the ability to return to the surface." He didn't finish his words, but the meaning was clear. Feng Chou asked, "So you're very familiar with the Underdark?" The middle-aged man shook his head. "I'm only familiar with the route I used to take. Even Dro and the Grey Dwarves don't dare to say that they're familiar with the Underdark. It's too big and complicated at this point." The middle-aged man suddenly thought of something and asked, "You said you were robbed near Forgisac?" Feng Chou nodded. "In the east of Forgisac, in the territory of Pedro Pioneer. I was attacked and captured by the Dro there. I had planned to go there to catch a green owl as my future magic pet. The green owl was known as the fastest common bird. It was also a bird that could move around day and night. It was the first choice for low-level mages to sign a magic pet." The middle-aged man stroked his chin and said, "I once heard the mages of our caravan mention that the city of the Durgar that we traded with should be right below Fagisark. The Durgar also mentioned that there was an enemy Dro city to their east. You said that you were captured in the east of Fagisark, but there shouldn't be a passage to the surface nearby." After hearing this, Feng Chou searched Leo's memory. After a moment, he seemed to have thought of something and said, "Could it be a new passage? Ferguson was opened up by Knight Eric. It's not impossible for there to be an undiscovered underground passage in just a little more than 10 years. Speaking of frontier knights, there was a need to mention the order of expansion. With the proliferation of the human population, the land that could be enfeoffed in the human kingdom became less and less. The path of advancement for middle-level professionals became narrower and narrower. This caused social unrest to a certain extent. In order to solve this problem and expand their territory into the wilderness, some countries issued an order of expansion. According to the order, any middle-level professional or above only needed to pay a deposit to be conferred as a frontier knight. They could also apply to the empire or the lord for a piece of wilderness as their territory. If the knight could occupy this area and cultivate a piece of land no less than 3,000 mu and maintain it for more than 20 years, the kingdom would receive half of the land as a reward and recognize the knight's ownership of the territory. The knight would also be given a corresponding title according to the castle, land, population, and other conditions of the territory. When the order of expansion was issued, countless middle-level professionals and above rushed to the wilderness. Who knew how many strong people shed their blood and tears in the wilderness? Although Leo had a noble surname, in reality, his family was only a remote branch of the Stuart family that only had the title of Baron. His father, Eric Stuart, was only the second son of the Baron and did not have the right to inherit. If it wasn't for Eric's father supporting him to open up a frontier knight territory, Eric would only be a commoner with a noble bloodline. At most, he would become a commoner knight of a certain family. Leo's father's frontier knight territory was on the eastern edge of Viscount Ferguson's territory. It was a forest plain close to the eastern coastal mountain range. Feng Chou searched Leo's memories and found that there seemed to be a bottomless cave on a mountain close to Pedro's frontier knight territory. Some time ago, his father wanted to use this cave, so he organized a team to explore it. After hearing Feng Chou's words, the middle-aged man's eyes lit up. He murmured, "Maybe you're right. It stands to reason that the cave in the east of Shaka City in the Vita Duchy is the only passage that connects to the surface world. The 2 Dro cities and 3 Grey Dwarf cities nearby all rely on this passage to trade with the surface world. Under normal circumstances, they wouldn't rob each other's trading caravans, because the other party could do the same. Once such a thing happened, the end result would be a loss for both sides, and no one would be able to do business." Feng Chou continued. "Unless someone discovered a new passage, then they wouldn't dare to cut off other people's trade routes without any scruples." The two glanced at each other and saw excitement and doubt in each other's eyes. Of course, Feng Chou wouldn't be convinced by the words of others. He believed that Simon wouldn't either, but at least this was a glimmer of hope. The two fell silent. Feng Chou finished the mushroom porridge in a few mouthfuls, and imitated the others, hanging the bowl around his neck. Feng Chou did not notice that in another corner of the house not far from him, the level 4 warrior who had eaten 3 big bowls of mushroom porridge in a row and filled his stomach was attracted by Feng Chou and Simon, who were whispering to each other. The level 4 warrior kept staring at them. Feng Chou had just put away the bowl when there was a sudden commotion at the back door of the house. Feng Chou took a look and saw that someone had noticed that the patient was dead. Several people carried the body and leaned it against the back door while laughing. Feng Chou faintly heard someone say, "At least I can sleep well tonight." Simon saw that Feng Chou was paying attention to that side. He took a look and explained, "Bear Goblin often sneaks in and kidnaps slaves to eat meat. Those who sleep at the door are in danger. If a bear goblin sneaks in and sees the body, it won't kidnap a living person." After listening to Simon's words, Feng Chou couldn't help but understand. No wonder everyone tried to stay away from the front and back door. Simon looked at the noise around him, especially at the level 4 warrior who was staring at him and Leo. He thought for a while and got up from the straw bed. He patted Feng Chou's shoulder and got up and walked out. Feng Chou followed him out of the stone house. Report. Select text and click report to let us know about any bad translation. Arcane Universe Chapter 17. Looking at Feng Chou's slender back, the level 4 warrior's eyes flashed. He licked his lips and waved to a lean man beside him. The slaves rarely left the stone house, although no one stopped them from doing so. If ordinary people went out, they would be easily captured by the bear goblin or even the cavemen. They would also be easily whipped by the patrols. Simon took Feng Chou into an empty house nearby. He told Feng Chou that the slaves in the house were working in the mushroom field at this time. The two walked into the house and Simon closed the door. After closing the door, Simon leaned against the crack of the door and looked out. Feng Chou also curiously leaned against the crack of the leaky door and looked out. He had not yet adapted to Qiankun Pagoda's scanning function, and he always forgot to use it. Through the crack of the door, Feng Chou saw a human slave huddled behind a stone house on the way they came, stretching his neck and looking in their direction. At this time, Feng Chou finally remembered the existence of Qiankun Pagoda and asked in his mind, "Qiankun Pagoda, who is this person? When did he start following us?" Qiankun Pagoda said, "This person is the subordinate of the level 4 warrior. He followed you out of the stone house not long after you left. This person has been trained in sneaking and tracking. His physical attributes are almost at the standard of a level 1 rogue." After listening to Qiankun Pagoda's words, Feng Chou could not help but laugh. A rogue who was not even level 1 dared to follow an intermediate warrior. It would be strange if he was not discovered. After getting the answer, Feng Chou left the door. Simon also retracted his gaze and sneered, "Don't worry about him." One day, Feng Chou was a little puzzled. With Simon's strength, killing a level 4 warrior was like pinching a bug, but he seemed to be worried about something. Feng Chou did not dwell on this issue. He asked, "What do you think we should do next?" Simon frowned and said slowly, "According to my experience, in the trade between the Underdark and the surface, there must be food. There is too little food here. However, food is a commodity with a low price. It doesn't make much sense to transport it in small quantities. If we transport it in large quantities, we will need transportation tools and roads. Recently, the slaves in the plantation area have been heavily transferred. Our workload is getting heavier and heavier, and our rest time is getting shorter and shorter. Although I was puzzled before, I didn't know why, but after hearing what you said today, if what you said is true, and there is really a shortcut to the surface nearby, then these slaves are very likely to be transferred to build the road." Feng Chou thought to himself, no wonder this guy was so easily fooled. It turned out that he had already discovered the clues. At this point, Simon fell into deep thought. After a while, he said, "What we need to do now is to wait and observe. We need to find this path. We must find it. In the Underdark, every step is the difference between life and death. We must find this shortcut." Feng Chou nodded. "As long as you can take me back to the surface, I swear in the name of Sir Abel Fajasak, the first successor of Viscount Fajasak, that my father will confer you as a hereditary knight of the Fajasak family and pay you 100,000 crowns as a reward. I can sign the letter of commitment with you now." Simon smiled and gave Leo a lame aristocratic salute. He said, "I am willing to serve you, Your Excellency." Feng Chou reached out and shook hands with him, showing his most sincere smile to the other party. Next, Feng Chou asked the other party about the situation of the slave area, and Simon patiently answered. From Simon's mouth, Feng Chou learned that the underground city he was in was called Thorn City. It was a very powerful force in the underground world nearby. According to Simon's understanding, Thorn City had a population of about 50,000 people. Among them, there were less than 20,000 drow, and the rest were slaves. The division of labor among the slaves was quite clear. The human slaves were only responsible for taking care of the mushroom fields, and some of the cavemen also worked in the mushroom fields. Feng Chou wondered why there were human slaves in the underground city. Simon told him that in the Underdark, any city with farmland, whether it was Drow City or the Grey Dwarf City, welcomed human slaves. Humans were the race that knew how to take care of farmland the best. Any underground city that used human serfs would greatly increase the production of farmland. The human slaves in the underground city came from a wide range of sources. Some came from the human world, and some came from the wilderness. Although humans were the most important intelligent creatures in this world, humans in this world did not occupy most of the surface like on Earth. In fact, humans in this world could only live in limited areas with cities, towns, and castles as the core. Even within the human countries, the wilderness areas that were not controlled by humans still accounted for most of the land. In this case, most of the exits from the Underdark to the surface world were in the wilderness. Some of the intelligent creatures in the wilderness, such as goblins, gnolls, ogres, and so on, would sometimes establish trade relations with the underground world. If they captured humans, they would trade them with the underground world for weapons and armor. Some of the goblin slaves came to the underground city in this way. Most of the goblins and cavemen worked in mining. There were more than a dozen mines near the underground city. The gray dwarf slaves in the city all worked in the craftsman area. They were mainly responsible for smelting and forging. In the south of the city, there was a lava lake. The dark red light that enveloped the entire city came from that lava lake. It was said that drow mages used the heat of the lava lake to build a large furnace to smelt the ores that the goblins and cavemen dug. There were also some human slaves who worked in the craftsman area as carpenters and cobblers. These craftsman slaves were treated much better than the farmer slaves. They were also allowed to form families and pass on their children. He told Feng Chou that the slaves in the plantation area were all cavemen. These creatures were far stronger than ordinary humans and were very obedient. They were far more useful in hard work than humans. Simon also asked Feng Chou about the process of his capture. Feng Chou told him half of the truth according to Leo's memory. Simon inferred from the degree of hunger that Feng Chou was feeling after he was knocked unconscious that there must be a shortcut from Pedro's territory to Thorn City. This was because after Feng Chou was knocked unconscious, it would take at least 7 or 8 days for the captive drow to reach Thorn City through the underground passage of Shaquille City. If Feng Chou was unconscious during this time, he might have died of thirst or hunger. But after Feng Chou woke up, although he felt thirsty and hungry, it wasn't serious. This meant that he wouldn't have been unconscious for more than a day. This undoubtedly meant that there was not only a passage near Pedro's territory, but also that it wasn't too far from Thorn City. The two talked for half an hour before leaving the empty house and returning to their stone house. Walking into the stone house, Feng Chou encountered something disgusting. Simon told Feng Chou that the burly level 4 warrior was called Buck. At this time, he was sitting on the back of a kneeling slave. Seeing Simon and Feng Chou come in, Buck pointed at Feng Chou and said to Simon, "This new kid is mine." After saying that, he didn't care about Simon's reaction at all. He spat on the ground and said to Feng Chou, "Come here, eat daddy's saliva. I'll give you something better later." Ha ha. The few people around Barker started to laugh evilly at Feng Chou and Simon. Report select text and click report to let us know about any bad translation. Arcane Universe Chapter 18. Hearing this, Feng Chou's face darkened. Looking at the large pile of phlegm, his stomach churned and he almost vomited. Simon's expression also became very interesting. Everyone in the room looked at Simon with schadenfreude. Some showed it on their faces, while others hid it in the depths of their eyes. In their eyes, the rank 4 warrior Buck was the king of this room. If the others didn't crawl at his feet, only death would await them, including small leaders like Simon. As the leader, the reason why Barker kept a few small leaders was because they were relatively strong and made good labor force. On the other hand, it was to fight against the leaders of the other stone houses. If the overall strength of a stone house was too weak, the other stone houses would rob the strong labor force of this stone house and eventually cause this stone house to decline completely. The drow weren't fools. Although they treated the slaves like sheep, in reality, they had a set of effective rewards and punishments. Stone houses that did well would be rewarded with jerky every once in a while. Stone houses with the worst harvest would be collectively rewarded with extra food for the bear goblin. That was why Buck roped in these small leaders. However, this didn't mean that they were on the same level as Buck. In this place where the fist decided everything, Buck, who had the biggest fist, could decide the life and death of others, including small leaders like Simon. Feng Chou looked at Simon. Others thought that Simon was going to be unlucky, but Feng Chou knew that the one who was courting death was the tall and strong fool opposite him. To a professional, going from rank 4 to rank 5 was a leap across the low and middle ranks. It couldn't be mentioned in the same breath as an increase in rank. If a warrior of the 4th rank could defeat 2 warriors of the 3rd rank, then a warrior of the 5th rank could easily defeat 4 warriors of the 4th rank. As long as Simon was willing, he could crush this disgusting fellow like an ant at any time. But to Feng Chou's surprise, Simon actually took 2 steps back and hid behind him. It seemed that this fellow didn't want to reveal his strength. Feng Chou shrugged indifferently and walked towards Buck. His eyes flashed with a faint light. This fellow really disgusted him. Seeing Feng Chou approach, Buck, who was sitting on someone else's back, pointed at the disgusting phlegm on the ground and said, "Come, eat daddy's saliva, baby. Daddy will give you something better later." Ha ha. Barker looked at Feng Chou's long and slender legs that were faintly discernible from his tattered clothes as he walked. He swallowed a mouthful of saliva, as if he was completely unaware of the danger this handsome man posed. Actually, this idiot couldn't be blamed. The strength of a beginner warrior was directly proportional to the size of their muscles. As for how great their strength was, it could be roughly determined just by looking at the muscles on their body. Only when a warrior advanced to the middle rank and produced some mysterious sublimation on the genetic level, the overall strength of the body would be improved qualitatively. At that time, a warrior's strength and size would become disproportionate. However, Feng Chou was different. The improvement in his physical fitness wasn't due to an increase in his size. Instead, it was due to the genetic changes that the Golden Dragon bloodline had made to him. Therefore, his physical appearance was at most that of a second-tier warrior. Buck didn't seem to have thought that he could be a middle-rank warrior at all. Feng Chou still didn't know why, but he knew that there must be a reason. His scan didn't detect any middle-rank warriors in this slave area at all. Simon was the only one, and he was hidden. This might be why Simon didn't want to expose himself. At this moment, many thoughts flashed through Feng Chou's mind. But these thoughts didn't stop him from fiercely kicking between Buck's legs. Although Buck's hands were placed on his thighs to block, they couldn't block the angry kick of a warrior who was close to rank 5. In fact, Buck wasn't without vigilance. He had already guessed that Feng Chou would attack him. After all, when Feng Chou came over, his face didn't look too good. Therefore, he had already prepared his hands on his thighs to block. He even planned to grab Feng Chou's kick and twist it hard. Then he would grab Feng Chou's hair and press this newcomer's handsome face against his thick phlegm. Then he would take advantage of this opportunity to ride on his body. Just thinking about it made him excited. The only thing he didn't expect was that Feng Chou's kick would be so fast and so powerful. The speed of a warrior's attack was related to strength and agility. With great strength, the speed of the kick and punch would naturally be faster. With great agility, the flexibility and coordination of the body would be better, and the attack speed would naturally be faster. Not only was Feng Chou's strength great, but his agility was also very high, so his attack speed was even comparable to a rank 5 warrior. Of course, an ordinary rank 4 warrior wouldn't be able to block it. How great was 37 points of strength? It was equivalent to 7 times the strength of an ordinary person on Earth. Not to mention the most vulnerable part of the human body, even a solid wooden ball would be smashed. Therefore, this rank 4 warrior was not only smashed, but even his pubic bone was broken. The incomparable pain made his face turn red instantly. His mouth was wide open like a dead fish, but he couldn't make a sound. The slave who was lying under him as a stool rolled and crawled to avoid it. Seeing that their boss was attacked, his 2 trusted subordinates rushed towards Feng Chou. One on the left and one on the right. Of these 2 people, one of them was the rogue who had followed Feng Chou and Simon before, and the other was a warrior who barely reached rank 1. These 2 people didn't see the powerful strength shown by Feng Chou's kick at all, and they still wanted to show off in front of their boss. In Feng Chou's view, these 2 people's attack was slow, and their movements were full of loopholes. He even waited for a moment in place, then bent his leg slightly, lowered his center of gravity, and then slid to the right. His body slammed into the arms of the warrior on the right, and his right elbow slammed into his chest with the force of the sliding step. After being hit by Feng Chou, the warrior on the right was knocked back at a faster speed as if he had been hit by a speeding motorcycle. He flew 2 meters horizontally and hit the wall with a bang. He paused for a moment before falling down from the wall. After hitting the person on the right, Feng Chou used the reaction force of the collision to stomp his right foot on the ground, and his whole body bounced to the left like a spring. With this force, Feng Chou twisted his waist and threw a punch. His right fist hit the chest of the rogue on the left like a cannonball. The power of this punch was stronger than the elbow just now, and the rogue was smashed into the wall 3 meters away like a ball. After punching away the two people who didn't know what was going on, Feng Chou took 2 steps forward and walked to the front of the level 4 warrior who was rolling on the ground in pain. He raised his fist and punched him one after another like a pile driver. In the first few punches, Buck still had some reaction, but after a few punches, he was paralyzed on the ground, and a big hole was smashed in his strong chest. After more than 10 punches in a row, almost hitting Buck's chest to his back, Feng Chou stood up, panting slightly. After a while, calming his breath and emotions, Feng Chou looked at the 3 corpses in front of him and sighed slightly. Report. Select text and click report to let us know about any bad translation. Arcane Universe Chapter 19. If he hadn't recovered the memories of the late Ming Dynasty, Feng Chou might have beaten up the disgusting Barker badly, but he would never kill without thinking. When Feng Chou made his move just now, Simon observed very carefully. He himself had the talent of disguise, so he was very careful in this aspect. He was worried that he would encounter a guy who pretended to be a pig to eat a tiger. After watching Feng Chou make his move, Simon breathed a sigh of relief. The other party was indeed as he had observed before, a level 4 warrior. As for why Feng Chou had strength that didn't match his appearance, the knowledgeable Simon knew that a powerful bloodline could cause this phenomenon, which was quite common among the nobles. Seeing Feng Chou standing there in a daze after killing the man, Simon smiled and walked forward. He removed a linen bag from the waist of the dead Barker and handed it to Feng Chou. Feng Chou was stunned. He took the bag and opened it to see that it was half a bag of dried meat. This should be the reward that Dro used to motivate the slaves. Since Simon wanted to continue his disguise, Feng Chou unceremoniously tied the bag to his waist. Seeing that Feng Chou took the bag, Simon turned to the slaves and ordered, "Drag the bodies of these 3 people to the door and put them there." The slaves who were scared silly by the slaughter just now reacted. The group of people panicked and hurriedly dragged the bodies to the door and put them down. During the operation, the slaves avoided Feng Chou's position and left a large empty space around him. Simon looked around at the trembling slaves and said, "From today onwards, His Excellency Liu is our new leader. Does anyone have any objections?" The slaves put their hands on their chests and bowed to Feng Chou. They all said, "No objections, His Excellency Liu." It was as if Feng Chou was a noble, their lord. Looking at the scene in front of him, Feng Chou naturally remembered Liu's memories of the people in his father's territory. When the people saw the father and son, they also bowed like this and respectfully called them His Excellency. He nodded slightly to show his approval to the slaves, and they all breathed a sigh of relief. Simon waved to the other 2 leaders. The 2 of them came out and knelt with Simon in front of Feng Chou. They said together, "We are willing to be your most loyal servants." Their solemn appearance made them look like knights pledging their loyalty to their lord, but their ragged appearance made Feng Chou want to laugh. He smiled and nodded. He said, "I accept your allegiance." However, the 3 of them did not get up. Simon asked, "Leader, please announce your rules." Feng Chou frowned and said, "As usual." At this point, he suddenly remembered that the previous leader, Barker, was a pervert. He did not know if there were any perverted rules. Thinking of this, he said, "Food distribution as usual, personnel distribution as usual. Everyone work hard and get rewarded. I will not mistreat anyone." At this point, he grabbed half a handful of jerky from his waist pocket and threw it in front of the 3 people. The 3 of them happily bowed to Feng Chou again, then picked up the jerky and stood up. When the 3 of them picked up the jerky, they automatically left the largest amount of jerky to the new leader's confidant, Simon. Feng Chou walked to the front of Barker's most luxurious straw bed. The straw mattress under the bed was very thick, and the top was covered with some tattered leather, so that people's skin would not come into direct contact with the hay. There was also a pillow made of hay wrapped in leather, which looked very comfortable. Feng Chou sat on the pillow and leaned against the wall. He glanced at the corpses not far away, then stared at the ceiling and fell into a daze. He still couldn't accept how cruel and cold-blooded he was. His ferocious attack just now didn't go through his brain at all. It was an almost instinctive reaction of his body. By the time he realized that this was not an illusion, not a training, but a real murder, Barker was already dead. And even if he realized that he had really killed 3 people at once, even if he felt that he should feel regret, guilt, panic, or something else. In fact, there was no ripple in his heart. It was as if he had done something insignificant. Even he himself felt cold at this kind of cold-bloodedness. He felt that recovering the memories of the late Ming dynasty had changed him, but he also felt that he had not changed. This seemed to be the nature of his hidden nature deep in his heart. The stone house gradually quieted down. Even though many people were not sleepy after what had just happened, everyone tried their best to sleep. They only had 8 hours of rest. After 8 hours, they would have to start a new round of work. Feng Chou fell into a daze for a while, then lay down. He ordered Qiankun Pagoda to stand guard for him and closed his eyes. Too many things had happened today. Not only was Feng Chou physically exhausted, he was also mentally and physically exhausted. Very quickly, he fell into a deep sleep. Feng Chou was not worried about his own safety. If he encountered any real danger, Qiankun Pagoda could instantly put him into the Qiankun Pagoda. Feng Chou felt that he had just fallen asleep when he was awakened by the sound of the door being kicked open. He opened his eyes and saw a few bear goblin kicking and beating the human slaves in the house, driving them to get up and to work. Feng Chou got up with a grunt and took the initiative to walk out of the house. Under the urging of the bear goblin, the human slaves quickly gathered outside the door. This patrol team was obviously not only escorting the slaves in this house. There were nearly 100 human slaves gathered outside the house, kicking and beating the slaves to line up. The patrol team escorted the slaves and walked towards the cave in the north of the city. This was a huge cave with a diameter of tens of meters. On the ground of the cave, there was a man-made path that was nearly 2 meters wide. It was not only for people to pass through, but also for vehicles. Drowse elves would domesticate a type of giant lizard as a beast. This giant lizard was 7 to 8 meters long and had great strength. Although its speed could not compare to that of a horse, its strength was several times that of a horse. Drowse elves used this type of lizard to carry goods or pull vehicles. As the team went deeper into the cave, the light in the cave became very dim. At this time, some fluorescent fungi began to appear on the ceiling and walls of the cave, barely illuminating the path. The group walked for about 2 kilometers in the cave, and a cave larger than the one in Drowse City appeared in front of everyone. The fantastic scenery in this cave made Feng Chou, who was seeing it for the first time, a little dazed. On the ceiling of the cave, there were fluorescent fungi growing. The light emitted by each fungus was not strong, but when the light emitted by thousands of fluorescent fungi on the ceiling gathered together, the light here was quite bright. It was almost equivalent to the bright moon on the night of August 15th. Even with the vision of an ordinary person, they could see quite far and quite clearly here. For Feng Chou, who had dim vision, there was not much difference between this place and daytime. In addition to the fluorescent fungi on the ceiling, the scenery on the ground of the cave was also quite dreamy. There were huge mushrooms that were several meters tall everywhere. The stems of these mushrooms were very thick, and the huge cap could cover an area of more than 10 square meters. Looking at Leo's surprised eyes, Simon introduced in a low voice, "That's giant tan. It's very hard after drying. It's good wood." Most of the wood and firewood in the Underdark came from them. In addition to these giant tan, there were also many huge ferns, shrubs, and mosses growing in the cave. These plants were in all kinds of strange colors, but there were few green ones. The growth of plants in the Underdark did not rely on photosynthesis, but on underground energy radiation. They could directly absorb energy from underground energy radiation. Report. Select text and click report to let us know about any bad translation. Arcane Universe Chapter 20. The crowd walked along the road between these strange plants for a while. After turning over a small slope, an underground lake with an area of about a few square kilometers appeared in front of everyone. A large area of land around the lake had been reclaimed into farmland. A kind of fungus with a blue canopy was planted in the farmland, and many slaves were busy in the fields. This blue fungus was the main crop in the Underdark. It was called the blue cap fungus. The spores of the blue cap fungus were rich in starch and protein. After collecting, drying and grinding, it would become high-quality flour. The quality was even better than the wheat on the surface, but the spores of the blue cap fungus were not high. After the blue cap fungus was planted, It generally matured in a month and produced spores. After that, spores could be harvested basically once a month. After 3 times, the blue cap fungus began to age, and the spore production was greatly reduced. Therefore, the blue cap fungus was generally only harvested 3 times. The total amount of these 3 harvests was only about half of the flour produced by the wheat. The blue cap fungus could be planted 3 times a year, and the flour produced was not worse than the land on the surface world. However, the arable land in the underground world was too scarce. The arable land in the entire Thorn City added up to only more than 10,000 mu. In the city of Dro, the spores of the blue cap fungus were something that only Dro could eat. The slaves ate the blue cap fungus itself. The canopy and stem of the blue cap fungus were rich in starch, but at the same time, they also contained a lot of coarse fiber. The amount of coarse fiber in the canopy was less than that of the stem. The slaves would separate the canopy and stem of the blue cap fungus and transport them to the cave in the south of the city. There was a huge magma lake in the cave. The temperature in the cave was very high, and the air was extremely dry. The blue cap fungus and their spores would soon dry there and then be sent to the mill not far away to be ground. Of course, the spore powder was Drow's meal. The canopy powder was the food of the slaves, and the stem powder, the worst quality, was the food of the livestock. The yield of the blue cap fungus spore powder was not high, but the yield of the canopy powder was quite large. The cost of feeding the slaves was quite cheap. Simon whispered some general knowledge to Leo as they walked. He pointed at the lake in the middle of the cave and said, "This lake may not look big, but it's very deep. Even Dro doesn't know how deep it is. This kind of lake can be very dangerous sometimes. There may be dangerous aquatic magic beasts hiding in it. This is a freshwater lake. In the Underdark, freshwater lakes are relatively safe. Saltwater lakes are even more dangerous. It is said that some saltwater lakes even have terrifying demonic fish. In the dark zone, both freshwater lakes and saltwater lakes can nourish such a vigorous underground jungle. However, the species of plants raised by freshwater lakes and saltwater lakes are somewhat different." Feng Chou listened to Simon's introduction with great interest. Unknowingly, he followed the slave team to the field by the lake. Their arrival replaced a group of tired human slaves. After the patrol team in charge of guarding them and the patrol team escorting Feng Chou and the others took over, they escorted the tired slaves to the city. Feng Chou and the others' task today was to water. Each of them received 2 wooden buckets made of giant tan to carry water from the lake and water the land. After a day of strong physical labor, not to mention the ordinary slaves, even Leo, who had a strong physique, felt quite tired. Feng Chou found that the labor density of the blue cap fungus field was much higher than that of the wheat field on the surface. Feng Chou also did farm work when he was young in his previous life. With his current body, Leo, the son of a pioneer knight, learned agricultural management knowledge from an early age. This knowledge told Feng Chou that the labor needed to serve the blue cap fungus field was at least 4 to 5 times that of the surface farmland. Of course, this was also related to the fact that there were no water conservancy facilities in Drow's elven farmland and the lack of animal power. It was no wonder that the 1 or 2,000 human slaves in Thorn City struggled to serve more than 10,000 acres of land. Over the next few days, Feng Chou and Simon used their rest time to sneak out of the city several times. They climbed from the gaps in the caves to high places and observed the population flow in the city. They found that a large number of slaves were brought into an inconspicuous cave in the west of the city every day. The slaves brought into the cave were all cavemen and goblins. There were no human slaves. This was related to the positioning of different slaves in the Dro City. In the Dro City, human slaves were used to plant mushroom fields. Goblins and cavemen were used to mine, and obviously, miners were used to build roads, which was more suitable for their profession. In desperation, the two could only continue to endure and lurk, waiting for an opportunity. After mixing with the slaves for a while, Feng Chou couldn't help but ask Simon a question. "Simon, I don't seem to have seen any powerhouses above level 5 in the slave area." Simon glanced at Feng Chou and explained, "Dro won't allow intermediate professions to appear among the slaves. For them, intermediate professions are already dangerous enough to cause great chaos in the slave area. They also have the ability and possibility of escape. Therefore, the intermediate professions that fall into Drow's hands can only go to one place, and that is the inner city's arena. Feng Chou suddenly understood. No wonder this guy was unwilling to expose his strength as a level 6 warrior. The two endured and lurked for more than a month. After more than a month, the Drow elves began to transfer human slaves into the cave. The two immediately mixed into the slave team without hesitation. The slaves who were transferred to the cave were obviously treated differently from the slaves who went to work in the mushroom field. The slaves who were escorted to the mushroom field were escorted by only one patrol team in a team of more than 100 people. On the other hand, the same number of slaves that were transferred to the cave were escorted by 2 patrols. Not only that, when the slave team walked to the entrance of the cave, 2 more patrols joined in the escort. The ratio of the number of people in the escort team and the slave team was almost 1:2, which made Feng Chou and Simon nervous. This kind of force was of course not to prevent the slaves from escaping. After entering the cave, the Drow who was escorting the slaves took a long rope and strung the slaves together. In this cave, Feng Chou saw a spacious road. What was strange was that this road was very flat, but there were no traces of artificial excavation. It was as if it was formed naturally. What was even more strange was that on the flat stone road, they could see the footprints of cavemen from time to time. This made them think of the scene of the cement ground being trampled on before it solidified. Could it be that this road was paved with cement? In fact, it was not. The result of Qiankun Pagoda's scan also told him that the ground was made of stone. Feng Chou quickly found the reason from Leo's memory. In the whole world, there were 2 quite famous transformation intermediate spells, which were stone to mud and mud to stone. The former of these 2 spells could turn several cubic meters of stone into mud, and the latter could turn the same amount of soil into stone. Obviously, there was a mage involved in the construction of this road. Otherwise, to build a road in the Underdark, where there were hard rocks everywhere, it was simply a sky-high project. As long as he thought about the Mage Tower, Feng Chou did not find it strange. The Mage Tower, in addition to having a strong fighting power, was also a mage training center, a production base for alchemy items and magic scrolls. If there was a mage tower in this city, then there must be a group of mages. Any mage, as long as they mastered these 2 spells, with the permission of the master of the mage tower, they could draw the power of the mage tower and repeatedly produce a large number of these 2 spell scrolls without worrying about the problem of spell slots. As the team went deeper into the cave, the light became darker and darker. In the beginning, there were newly transplanted fluorescent fungi that barely provided a little light, but as the team went forward, even the fluorescent fungi were gone. The cave became pitch black. Human vision lost its effect, and the slaves unconsciously tightened the ropes in their hands. Soon, even Feng Chou's dim vision lost its effect, which meant that the cave was almost completely dark. Report. Select text and click report to let us know about any bad translation.